Hi, everybody. My name is Dennis Calero, and I am the line artist on Casino Royale, the adaptation. I have with me Mr. Van Jensen, who is the adapter, scripter, all-around writer, creator guy. Hi, Van.
Hey, thanks for having me into your palatial estate.
There you go. That's right. It is full of. Actually, it's full of boxes. We're about to move. I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about Casino Royale. And the first thing I wanted to, I figured we could ask each other questions, but I wanted to start off by asking you how you felt when you realized that you were going to be adapting this novel, and if you were a big James Bond fan to start off with.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in like middle of nowhere, western Nebraska, so the James Bond films for me were the thing that I first discovered, and they were really that they were so absurdly different from everything that I grew up in. So it was this real escape. So my cousin and I made this huge effort to track down copies of every Bond film, and would very purposefully watch through all of them. So it was the combination of, I mean, it's one of, if not the biggest characters in the world, right? So
yep.
There's that point where it's like, well, I can't possibly say no to this, combined with the lunacy of considering stepping into those gigantic shoes.
Right, and this wasn't just, as people who will read the graphic novel will figure out very quickly, this isn't really so much an adaptation. I mean, this is the novel. We're really not changing anything significant. It's set vaguely in the year the book was published, was our thought, which would make it like 1955, something like that.
Yeah, early to mid 50s, and yeah, I mean there were, of course it has to change in adapting into a comic, but that was kind of the mandate from the Fleming estate, was this needs to be a comic book version of the novel as it is, not not Casino Royale the film, which plot wise has a lot of similarities to the novel, but I think
right.
tonally and in a lot of the specifics kind of varies pretty wildly. Right. Yeah. So how about you? Like, were you a big Bond person, and what kind of combination of books and films or video games was it for you?
Oh my God, it was Moonraker was the first, because I was a kid, and I wanted to see Moonraker because the poster, very wisely, they wanted to evoke Star Wars. Yeah, by then,
right.
I would find out later the movie series, after 4 or 5 movies in, began to become an imitator of whatever was coming out in public, in pop culture. The way that Man with a Golden Gun had influences of Eastern cinema, which is popular at the time. So when Moonraker came out, they were doing a Star Wars riff, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, and fell completely in love with Bond as a character. And in a way, sort of unlike Star Wars, Bond grew up with me, because as I got older and more quote-unquote sophisticated, there were other iterations of Bond, of course, specifically the novels, that I could then delve into and deepen my love of the character, and grow with the character. And also, I also just felt that Luke and Han, these were all very sort of simplified archetypes, and sort of very purposely very flat characters. And Bond, I responded to Bond as being a sort of a deeper character. I tell people all the time, especially, and we'll talk about it, and talk about sort of the inherent misogyny in a lot of the source material, et cetera. I never considered. Shortly into my adulthood, I realized that Bond was not an aspirational character. That he was a very, not at all. He was a very. In fact, if anything, I would argue that the arc of Casino Royale is that here's this guy that's very dismissive of women, or at the very least is annoyed at having to work with someone on this mission, and then he ends up genuinely falling in love with her, which makes the ending even more tragic, as anyone, no spoilers, but you'll find out. And, I just responded to that as more mature storytelling. And, of course, I think that's the one thing that people, when they see the movies and they come to the books, that's the first big surprise is, sort of how somber the character is and how, he's not a action hero. He's a thinking, a complex, and a bit of a bastard. And yet still a hero, and I think that's what keeps people coming back. It's what I think the core appeal to me about the character, and so literally it's a dream come true to draw this book and to have come to the project when I did, and then read your script and genuinely be like, oh, I hope this doesn't suck, because I would hate to get to draw an adaptation of this book that I love so much and have the adaptation be terrible, which happens, it happens, it happens, and be like, oh God, now I have to get through this. And I was just genuinely impressed by your script in terms of both how faithful it was, and yet you were able to take what is it's a prose novel, and you made it, and it is an action-driven novel, but I think you definitely did things to make it more visual and make it more visually interesting. And I'm curious to see what people's reactions are going to be to the book, because it's definitely not a traditional comic. This really is, in the strictest sense, a graphic novel. This is the novel.
I mean, I think that there are, and the starting point of it is, yes, it's an action story, but it's not that actiony.
Right.
There's kind of one chase set piece that is really mild in tone, and that's kind of it. And then there's the extremely long stretch in the casino with little bits of action inserted in it, but even like there's one explosion, and it's literally like a goof almost. The way that it's So and so much of it is and I think the strength of the novel is the interiority of it. It's way more into Bond's mind than any of the films really ever have been. Which is, I think it makes for a great novel, but it's a big challenge to take. That's like the hardest thing to do in comics is to show, human interiority, because, the main way that people represent that is a bunch of text. And a bunch of text is like the worst possible thing to do with comics. So, it was like, that's the strong suit of the novel. And then also, we had the Fleming estate that was very committed to keeping as much of the narration as possible in there. So there was a lot of pressure to not just be like, oh, we can cut this, we can cut this, we can cut this, we can cut this, and just, really limit that stuff. So I mean, I feel like it, and I'm a pretty visual thinker, so I was doing a lot of, kind of thumbnails of breaking things down and trying to come up with those ideas of like how to visualize this stuff. And, I think, and it also is like, I mean, obviously when you came in, you took those ideas and ran with them, but also, I mean, you brought a ton of your own ideas to bear into it of how to, bridge that gap between the text and the visual. But I mean, I feel like there's stuff that we did in that book that no one has really ever done with comics. And I think that creativity evolved out of us being super confined and super limited.
Right. It was interesting to me. We had representatives of Ian Tubbing Publishing, which is exciting for me, and because they're the people, they're the ones to keep the flame alive, and they were had very specific ideas about certain details, and yet I never felt oppressed by them. I mean, I felt like it was all to help, and it was all a resource. And there weren't. I don't remember a lot of disagreements. I think the biggest disagreement might have been there was a feeling that there wouldn't be slot machines in the casino
I
at that
forgot
time.
about that. Right.
And I felt there was, because I looked up reference and I was like, here's a casino in I think it was 1928, and here are slot machines.
Yeah.
And then, it's a collaboration, so a lot you learn to let a lot of things go. You have to pick your battles. And but for the most part, it was just helpful. I mean, they were doing so much work to get me the references and the information that I needed to evoke the period. You do your best. 1950, I think, is like suits don't look all that much different.
Yeah.
So that wasn't much of a problem. Weaponry was relatively, it's post World War II. Weaponry was relatively modern, and plus I love mid-century design anyway.
Right.
So it was a chance to do some of that, and then to put some stuff, because it's an old casino. So you figure, even though it's 1950-ish, 1955-ish, there's going to be stuff there from the 1890s, from the 1870s. The way there are buildings and structures now that are, and facilities that are, from the 70s or the 80s, from the 1970s or 1980s. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it was a I felt like it was a good combination with the Fleming state of, and a shout out to our friend over there, Johnny, who was just this workhorse of poring over every detail and providing so many resources. But yeah, they're the torchbearers of this literary empire. And so, you should expect that they're going to take this very seriously and have a lot of very specific ideas about things. I would kind of be shocked if that was not the case. And yeah, I think that there was some really interesting latitude. And I would say the things that we did within the book that I felt like were the kind of the biggest chances that we took, style wise, design wise, kind of big idea wise. They were most excited about those things.
Right.
So the things where I was like, oh man, how how am I gonna write this scene of 2 pages of Bond being in a hotel or a hospital bed, lamenting his broken testicles, and they were all in on it.
Yeah, I always felt supported, and I know that a lot of people say that about these kinds of projects and don't really mean it, but we do. And they were always for, be daring, do something different. Let's, this, and they were also very deferential in the sense that of saying like, okay, comics is not what we do. We're not going to try to tell you how to do that part of the job.
Yeah.
We're just going to insist that this stay as true to the novel as absolutely possible, and we respected that, and that was great, and just made it a better book. And I'm excited because the comic book fans are going to read this, and that's great. But there's also a legion of Bond fans who may not necessarily read comics, who seem, from responses on Twitter and Facebook and other social media, they seem excited to come to this and to experience this story this way. And I'm sure there's going to be people who this is their first exposure to this novel and to this iteration of the character, and that's going to be very exciting for me to see how they react.
Yeah, it was kind of like almost perfect timing the week before the book came out. So I haven't even seen a physical copy of it because everywhere I've gone has been sold out. But so I had been hoping to get copies in time because I was going to this event like a week ago, I guess, that was a spy themed convention. And so I was invited because of Bond, and they actually had a couple of actresses who were Bond girls who were guests there. It was fun. But there were several kind of key figures of Bond fandom who've published books about Bond, who are just big proponents of the character and very dedicated to the mythos, who were there. And we had a panel, and so I kind of talked about our process, our philosophy, what we did, and they were just universal in coming up to me afterwards and just kind of saying thank you for taking this as seriously as you did and for being so dedicated to maintaining Ian Fleming's voice.
Right. And it should be said that there was a comic strip, a James Bond comic strip that ran, I think it began running even before Dr. No came out.
Yeah, it did.
And so there have been other iterations of this story, but not like this. Those really were sort of comic strippy adaptations, which are great. And one of my favorite artists, I think a Yugoslavian artist, is Horak, drew for that strip for years and years, and I love that stuff. But we can say confidently that it's never been done the way that it was done in this in our current edition.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to go back to your point, I think this is kind of the perfect way for people who, love Bond movies, love the video games, whatever, have that familiarity with the character but have never read the novels. This is a great entry point. And it is very much, as you alluded to, a sort of warts and all adaptation. I mean, we did not censor the ugly stuff.
Right.
Was that a challenge for you, kind of creatively? In I know that there's nothing that's like overtly awful. It's more Bond's kind of characterization and internal thoughts that are especially sexist. But was there anything that was just sort of like challenging for you to, as a creator, work on?
No, in the sense that, James Bond in the literary character isn't Mike Hammer. And for those of you who've never read Mike Hammer, I enjoy those novels, but Mike Hammer as a character has been criticized for being violent, sexist, horrible. And I actually read I, the Jury very recently for the first time, and I was just like, is this just a gorilla they shaved and put into a suit and taught to talk and shoot a gun? Because he's literally at any point when any other, and it's kind of fun that way, because literally at any point where another character like a Bond or like a Sam Spade would choose to use to be diplomatic in a situation, Mike Hammer just punches people all the time, every day, everywhere he goes, and it's kind of great. But so Bond is not that, and
he's not a caveman in a suit.
Yes, he's not a caveman in a suit, and a lot of his dismissal of Vesper, especially at the beginning, even though it's couched in a misogynist overtone, it's really just because he's annoyed. You'd be just as annoyed with a man. He just wouldn't think of it. He just wouldn't think of that person in those terms, which I think is why Bond gets to skirt that line. For me, it wasn't purposely troublesome. It might be for some people, and people are going to have to make their own minds about that. But I've always said that Bond's relationship to his masculinity is part of the character. I mean, and I would argue that the book knows this, and the book the book doesn't present him as being someone who's especially aspirational. He's not a white knight. He's not supposed to be. He is someone who's gone through a world war. He has attitudes that are in line with the period he grew up in and is living in. He, at the time of the novel, Bond is a arguably early 30s. I would actually personally put him towards the end of his 37, 38. So for a person at that time, he's not that bad. And he also falls in love and changes and softens in his attitude, and acknowledges when Vesper does something that's laudable, and acknowledges her as a worthy colleague. And I don't think you can ignore that either. Yeah,
it's very much, to me, it's and there were a couple of specific lines that I'd said I wanted to cut from the adaptation, because I didn't feel like, I mean, we had to cut a bunch of text. Just that's the deal. So
yeah,
there were a few things I was like, these are the like particularly problematic ones for me that I just this is sort of my like red line. Like I'm not going to put this text in there, and they were okay with that. I said, it's like if it needs to be in there, that's fine. You just need someone else to write this book. Right. And they were supportive of that. I do think it's this really important thing for readers to remember. Characters are not this direct mouthpiece for the mentality of the creator.
Right.
There's commentary.
Not necessarily, right.
Yeah, absolutely there can be creators who write characters that are just mouthpieces, but that is not necessarily the case. And this story, it's really it's so interesting that Bond, it's like he's gone through the World War, but he's still kind of naive at I would say actually very naive at the start of the book, and it's just like he's excited to be a spy and it's all cool and he wants to be this badass spy, and then falls in love and kind of has this degree of growth of it seems like he's going to transcend and escape this life of harshness and really
and violence,
and tragically has that ripped away from him, so that by the end it's almost like he's kind of succumbing to feeling like trapped by destiny. So there's obviously stuff in there that's just gross and cringeworthy and awful, but I think it's in the service of telling this really nuanced and compelling character journey.
Yeah, and themes and things that Bond struggles with that will continue through the series as people read through the series, and knock on wood, we'll get to illustrate some of those, if not all of them. Bond will continue to struggle with those, I think it's going to be amazing, and I think that's a good place for us to end. What do you think?
Well, I had one last question for you.
Please.
So the legend is that after the success of the Bond novels, that Ian Fleming had a gold-plated typewriter made. Yeah,
I've heard that legend. Yes.
So I'm pretty sure that's confirmed as fact. So my question to you is, upon completion of this, what are you going to have gold-plated?
Oh, should we do an Austin Powers thing? I will tell you this: the day that we finished, the last page was done and was accepted, I did have a nice Vesper Martini. I had my own variation called the Vesper Royale. Basically, I flipped the vodka and the gin, and I add champagne. So I had that.
Nice.
So that's very nice. What would I gold plate? I could gold plate my pen, I guess, or I could just buy one.
Yeah, that's solid.
There you go. Solid gold. There you go. Great show.